What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Gsluke here with our round one preview for this week's major championship, the Open Championship to be exact, over there across the pond. Gonna break down what to expect there on Thursday and give you a few props here on Prize Picks on an underdog that you might want to keep an eye on, or perhaps even go out there and play for yourself. So let's start with a look at the golf course, which is Royal Liverpool. We haven't seen it since 2014 for the 143rd Open Championship, so it's been a while. Your last champion was Rory McIlroy, and what I want to focus on here are some of the scores, right? Your winning score was minus 17, your top 10 was pretty much there at minus 9, and in terms of your cut line, I think that's especially important, right? It was plus 2, so your average score, right, for the first two rounds was right about plus 1 per round, so I think that's a good metric to keep in mind, right? Something around a par 72, a par 73 would be the average, right, out there for that golf tournament. And there's been a few changes to this year's event. So first and foremost, this was a par 72. Now is going to be a par 71. So the hole that they changed is hole number 10. It was a par 5 that you can see, right, Rory birdied 3 of the 4 days. Well, that would have been 3 pars and then a bogey right after that change. So that's going to have an impact on the scoring, right? You can pretty much add 4 to every single player's score, and that's what they would have scored under those new conditions. Furthermore, hole 17 is a lot more difficult now. They made it a turtle shell green, so I believe it was still a par 3. Actually, it got changed from a par 4 to a par 3. I believe they just took the old number 17 and moved it, I believe, to hole number 15 or something like that. But there's a completely new hole for hole 17, and it is extremely difficult. So I would expect conditions to maybe be a little bit more difficult this time around in terms of just the setup of the golf course. Now we've got to look at the weather, which we'll be taking a look at Thursday on here, right? Trying to get an idea of what to expect. But what might be even more important, right, than what we're going to see there for the first round of action is what we had the past 3-4 days, which has been a bunch of rain. You've seen players during practice rounds playing through a heavy downpour, some windy conditions too. You had rain going sideways for quite a little bit, and that's going to soften up this golf course. If you weren't watching Royal Liverpool in 2014, which I'm sure a lot of you out there, myself included, really can't remember that event, I went back, I watched it. It rained for 3 of 4 days. It was extremely green out there, like you see for some of the early images this week. It wasn't playing firm and fast, and that's what led, right, to this 17 under par winner, right? So considering they changed hole number 10 to that par 4, you'd probably see a minus 13 winner this time around, right? I think it's very comparable. I think maybe hole 17 makes it slightly more difficult. The internal OBs are a little bit closer to some of the fairways this time around, which, if you don't know what an internal OB is, it's essentially like adding a lake to a golf course without actually having to add the water, right? If you hit it into an internal OB, you have to take a drop from your former location, and it's just another way of penalizing these players. They added a few of them for this year and made them even more penal. So don't look at this and think that they're going to go even lower, right, than 17 under par. They do have that change in terms of the par of the golf course, and a few changes to kind of beefing this place up. So when we take a look at the weather on Thursday, you can see that it doesn't look nasty, right? We don't have 40-mile-an-hour winds like we had for the final round of the Scottish Open, but it's still there in the 10 to 13-mile-an-hour range in terms of your sustained winds, and the wind gusts go from like 15 up to like 21, 22 miles an hour, which is significant. Right? That's not a walk in the park. That's not going to be like ideal, like you're playing in a dome sort of conditions. It's also not going to be nasty. So I would expect this course to play pretty typical. Maybe it's a little bit more receptive than it will be for the rest of the event because of all the rain that they got on Monday and Tuesday over there in Liverpool. But this course, I'm expecting to stand up, right? I think the scoring average for round one, at least for the field, is going to be over par. Data Golf has it at 1.5 shots over par per round. That seems pretty accurate, especially for the first 2 rounds. Now, when we're looking at the Prize Picks board, we're going through some of these players, realize they are much, much better than the field average here. So they're not going to average anywhere close, right, to 1.5 over par. But it's worth considering, worth keeping in mind when we're going through some of these metrics. We don't have the normal stat profile for this course because it was the whole way back in 2014. So a few, research bits that I did a bunch of deep diving on that you guys are going to find very important. First off, your birdie rate for the week, it was about 3.36. Your bogey rate, I believe, was like 3.45, something in that range. And that was just all the pure raw numbers from that event. So that's, with hole number 10 as a par 5. If you change hole number 10 to a par 4, everything changes. Your birdie average goes down to 2.91 because hole number 10 was the second easiest hole on the entire golf course. Your bogey average jumps the whole way up to 4.11 per round, and your scoring average gets even worse from that, right? It goes from like a little bit over par to like a whole like stroke and a half over par. So this change, at least if you just take the raw data from that year and change it, is going to have a drastic impact on scoring. Now, a few disclaimers with that, right? They're going to play it as a par 4. It's probably going to play a little bit shorter this year, so the scoring average should be easier, and the pin locations might be a little bit easier too, right? So don't just think that it's going to be a one-to-one change by taking this and changing it from a par 4 to a par 5, but it's still going to play on the difficult end of the spectrum, right? It's going to be in the high 400s when it comes to its yardage. Don't expect to see a lot of birdies at hole number 10. Hole 17, right, that change, that extremely difficult hole, I think is also going to introduce a little bit of variance, more bogeys into the equation. So I know the 4.11 average is probably a little bit higher than what you're going to see because of that hole number 10 nonsense. But let's say the field average would be like 3.85 and be 3.9. Considering that, the hole number 17, I think, is going to more than account for that. So the field averages for this year, I think you're going to see a birdie average of just over 3, right? Maybe like 3.15, 3.2 birdies. The world has gotten better at golf, right? They're longer. The technology's gotten better. I expect to see some sort of improvement even with the more difficult golf course. And then also in terms of your bogey average, I think it's going to be right around 4 bogeys per round. So if you add that all up, right, it's going to be a slightly over par scoring average. Maybe not 1.5 over par like Data Golf has, but I think something in the 1 to maybe 1.2 over par range would be reasonable to expect. So a lot of research. I know we did a lot of talking there, but it's important, right, when we get into some of these plays. So I'm going to have Brooks on there as our first play, and one other play on Prize Picks we'll get to, and then some underdog stuff as well. So Brooks, we'll start with Brooks. He's at 70 strokes. That is 1 under par for this course. Again, a par 71, which means I'm expecting him to play about 2 shots better than the field average. If we take a look at his last 12 measured rounds, well, he's actually gaining 3.2 strokes to the field. So if I'm spot on with my field average, right, if I think it's going to be a under par average, right, he should be projecting closer to 69 strokes, right, like these other top end players. Now it's a small sample, right? He's only played in the major championships this year, and that's where I'm pulling that data from. But those are also the world's best fields, right? You're comparing him to literally the cream of the crop, right? Not even like a PGA Tour level, a level that even exceeds that kind of value. So I like Brooks Koepka. I like the fact that he kills these major championships, and I already bet him outright this week, right? I'm playing him in fantasy. He's already a player that I'm rallying behind at this point, and probably my top prop on the board here. So there's some other unders I'm taking. Prize Picks has a relatively high board here when it comes to some of their strokes props. But if you go to classical sports books, you can actually get even better numbers. I mean, guys like JT, they've got it like 71.5 strokes. Guys like Brooks, I believe, is 70.5. Guys like Rory and Scheffler at 69.5 strokes on those books. So I'm not going crazy with unders. A lot of my early exposure was unders on birdies when they were at like 4.5 birdies. It was overs on strokes when they were a lot lower than they are now. We've seen a lot of bumping, right, since early in the week. But at this stage, these are some of the better props, I'd say, like these elite tier players that are mispriced. And there are a few others on the board that I'm taking that, of course, are posted over there on the Patreon page that you might want to consider too. So check that out if you're on the Patreon. If not, join the Patreon, see what I'm playing here for round 1. Next up, we've got this Billy Horschel under. So for holes played, his under 36.5 holes, that means that we essentially are looking for him to miss the cut. And he's been okay at the Open. Last year, actually finished in the top 25, which was one of his better starts in a major championship period. But what I worry about Billy is that he's in one of his worst stretches of form. I mean, the guy a few months ago was on a stretch of like 7 or 8 straight missed cuts. He still missed 2 of his last 4 cuts. And though he was decent the last couple starts, like I don't know if that's enough for him to be projected for over a 50% cut rate. In fact, per my DFS projections, which I do a lot of cut percentages on there, I have him at a 30.1% rate of making the cut, which is just outrageously low. There are other guys on the board here too that are also in the low 30s when it comes to their made cut rate that you probably want to take as some serious value for under. So I think Billy Ho is my favorite because of how poor the form has been over the last few months. Respect the guy. I think he'll snap out of it at some point, but just, based on the recent form, the metrics, right? I think pretty much everyone would agree that that would be the plus EV play right there. So if you want to take this 2-man, I think that's a good way to do so. It's 2 of my top props over here on Prize Picks. But of course, there are other unders for this holes play that I like. Like I said, some other guys in the low 30s. And for strokes, some unders that you might want to take over there for strokes that I have posted over there on the Patreon page. Our last slate we're going to go through here is Underdog, where literally every prop has been bumped. So the last 2 that are left, we've got this Rory over 2, this Jon Rahm over 2 bogeys. The average for bogeys, I'll remind you, right, was 4.11, right, after we changed hole 10 from a par 5 to a par 4. Now, the average for these sort of players is going to be much lower than that, right? But what I like here is the push equity. These guys are almost certainly going to get to 2 bogeys. If they do, right, it'll be a refund over here in Underdog, even if the other one were to miss, right, only make like 0 or 1 bogeys. If one of them pushes, you'll get a refund there. And if this course plays as difficult as I think it could, right, because it'll be at least a little bit windy tomorrow, right, particularly towards the afternoon, right, the wind gusts and the sustained winds do tick up a little bit. The guys with later tee times, remember they're over there in England, right, so this is the afternoon in England when these guys are teeing off. I think might have a little bit of a harder time about it. So I'm taking these 2 overs. They're elite tier players for sure, but when they're being projected for 4.5 birdies, right, get their strokes lines are only 2 under par, right? That means they're being projected for 2.5, sometimes even 3 bogeys per round, right? I mean, if they're going to cover birdies and they're going to cover strokes, right, they're going to have to make like 5 birdies and 3 bogeys. So that's what we're looking at there. I think that's the best way to attack the board over here in Underdog, especially after the bumps. Like the strokes lines were sometimes 1.5, 2 strokes lower. The birdie lines have been bumped to crap here too. I guess if you want to take some unders, like a Brooks under 4.5 birdies, I don't hate, like at all. What do they have Rory as? He's still 4.5? He probably still is 4.5. Yeah, he's at 4.5. What's Rahm? Is Rahm still at 4? Yeah, they had him at 4.5 at one point. You could have taken that rather than the bogey prop over here. But yeah, based on the value that we have on the board, these are probably your best options. So like I said, guys, if you want access to all the props that I'm taking, all the action of rounds 2 through 4, I love doing these round 1 previews, but for all of that, check out the Patreon, right? Link is down below. It is $10 for the month. Gets you all of my fantasy sheets, all of the analysis there, Discord server, and access to all of these plays as well. So make sure to check that out in the description if you haven't already. Best of luck with all of your props for round 1. Check out my live stream tonight if you've got any specific questions, any props you want to run by me. That'll be at 7 p.m. Eastern. I'll also throw a link in the description of the video to that. And also make sure to check out my live streams over the weekend too. So we'll obviously get a lot of data from round 1. We'll be able to react to what we saw out there and hopefully make it an even more profitable end to the week after we hopefully start off to a hot start tomorrow. So best of luck out there, guys. Appreciate all the support here on the channel. Smash the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you guys for the live stream tonight.